Now, as we've preached through this letter, we've emphasized the fact that Christians will be persecuted for the faith. It was very helpful that Tony reminded us of that there are no nations, perhaps, maybe just our own, really, maybe the United States of America. There are almost no nations where Christians are not persecuted. But we should, in fact, suffer if we follow Christ faithfully, because his life was a life of rejection, a life of misunderstanding, a life ultimately of suffering. He is the man of sorrows. We then have no right at all, none, to an easy life, to earthly justice. Jesus didn't get any. The King of Kings. And where is our hope in any case? Is our hope merely in earthly institutions, offering imperfect and man-made versions of justice? Surely we Christians have a better hope than that. A better hope than the Supreme Court and the police. As good as these institutions are, surely we hope for more. Surely we hope for more than just not suffering. Will we, you, me, will we remain faithful to the age to come? Or will we prefer this present age with its comfort, with its ease, with not suffering? Or will we remain faithful to that day of justice when we receive our crown of righteousness? That's the question that this passage is dealing with as we finish this book. And we'll think that through using these titles: Paul's foes, Paul's friends, and his farewell. Firstly, then, we're going to consider Paul's foes. And we need to do that in light of his predicament, because remember, Paul is writing this. He's in chains. He's actually in prison. Chapter 2, verse 9. And he fully expects to die very soon. Chapter 4, verse 6. He thinks the time is coming. And he's not a drama queen either. This really is the situation. He mentioned his first apology in verse 16, his first defense. And how, as a result of that, he just escapes the jaws of death. End of verse 17. You see, there was a trial, and he received a stay of execution. And it now seems he's waiting for his second trial, and that's just going to be a formality, surely, because he knows, and he confesses in verse 18, that Jesus will bring him safely into his heavenly kingdom. He got one stay of execution, but that is all it is. A stay of execution. So it's just a matter of time until Paul will be executed. So this letter was written after that first stay of execution, quite even possibly immediately after, just days after, which is why it has this feel of urgency and solemnity about it. These are pretty awful circumstances, aren't they? Dreadful. Paul ended up where he was, unjustly. He'd been informed on. There'd been conspiracies against him. He got here to death row in part because of this guy, Alexander, the coppersmith, verse 14. And you could translate that verse quite legitimately as Alexander informed many evil things against me. And of course in verse 15 he goes on to say that he strongly opposed our words, our sayings, our statements. And then he goes into talking about his first defense in that imperial court. It's quite likely then that this man did great harm to Paul by testifying against him, standing against his message. Alexander was this man of renown and standing in the local community, and it seems he was used as an advocate in court for the prosecution against Paul. Now, under the Roman legal system, the defense and the prosecution could bring in these advocates. They're kind of like barristers, but it's not really a legal role. It's not so much about arguing the case or using eyewitnesses. In fact, these men of significance could easily outweigh the testimony of dozens of eyewitnesses. And so in verse 16, Paul says, I didn't have anyone like that by my side. There were no men who came and stood with me. There probably were locally those who knew Paul and liked Paul and who could have stood with him in that capacity, but they didn't. He was alone. He had no patron at his side. It's important that we make that clear, because when we read in verse 11, Paul says that Luke alone is with me. So is he alone, or is Luke with him? Or did Luke desert? We've got to think that's what Paul is saying here. But Luke didn't desert. Luke was beside him. And he had these other men, these guys like Titus and Crescens and Tychicus, who he could call on, but they're going elsewhere, doing different things. So when Paul says that he had nobody at his side in the trial, that everyone deserted him, he's referring, I think, to that specific role of the procurator, the prosecution, the barrister guy who stands with him. And so men like Luke and Tychicus were not qualified for that particular task. They couldn't act in that capacity. They were outsiders, perhaps, foreigners. They couldn't do that. They needed to be local men of standing. And so with no legal advocate at his side, Paul says Alexander was able to have a field day. He did him great harm. You see, at this time, Nero had already declared that Christianity was illegal and that anyone who preached or promoted the Christian faith would be executed. Simple as that. So Paul warns Timothy about him in verse 15. He is bad news. You take a wide berth round Alexander. Don't think he's there to help you. Paul also mentions, we're thinking about his foes. Paul also mentions in verse 10 that Demas has deserted him. Now, this is particularly painful for Paul because Demas was one of his faithful co-workers in the past. You can read well of him in Colossians 4 and in Paul's letter to Philemon. At this time when you really need your friends around you to encourage you, you've just been before the full weight of Nero's court, Roman law against you. You've survived execution by the skin of your teeth. You've just been given a stay. You don't know how long you've got left. This world superpower is wanting to throw the book at you. You've got false teachers trying to undermine you. And that is the moment Demas walks away. He's deserted me. And in the original, it's a closed tense. As far as Paul is concerned, it is done. He may have repented, but it'll be too late because Paul will be dead. For Paul, it's all over as far as Demas is concerned. It's always really painful, isn't it, when people walk away from a church as if it doesn't matter. And they say, well, we're still brothers in the Lord. That's true, but it does nothing to mitigate the pain of severance, the feeling of being deserted, of being stabbed in the back. We're a body when we come together. We are one. We are joined by faith and by the Holy Spirit. And so to cut ourselves off is to wound the body. It is to do harm to a living thing. And it's to work against the Holy Spirit, who's the one who brought us here in the first place. That's why it hurts so bad for us. But imagine the pain for Paul. The brotherly love of a comrade could have lifted him from his gloom, could have made his misery slightly more bearable, could have emboldened him, having his friend beside him, to face the flames. But he's just gone. Demas, we read, had affections for this present age, this present world. He's a coward. He's unprepared, perhaps, to suffer for his faith. He viewed this life as more important than the life to come. He was one whose hope was in this world and getting what you want now, and he thought it was okay to walk away to get it. It's really sad. But will we endure? What about you? What about me? Will we show that our love for Jesus and the justice of heaven, our love for the fellowship that he's placed us into, is the most important thing to us? Or will we choose our desires, our wants, satisfying ourselves now, forsaking truth, forsaking friends? Demas, by his actions, showed where his heart was. And we need to think, what about me? Paul's foes, right through this letter, showed where their hearts were by their actions, didn't they? A man's actions always kind of reveal his heart. His life reveals his doctrine. So whether it's Alexander who seeks to bring down a gospel worker, whether it's Demas who flees when the heat is on, whether it's those disqualified creeps who scratch your itch, who lure you away from the body with their side issues and compromised home lives, Paul warns in this letter, which is his last will and testament for the church. It's so easy. Look at their lives. Look at what they do. Look at their ministries. Look at their actions. And for us today, the same is true. We cannot turn a blind eye to these things at the cost of the gospel of our local church, or to seek ease and comfort, despite the fact that the liberal elites are telling us, don't preach the gospel, you'll offend somebody if you preach. Now isn't the time for timidity. Now isn't the time for more side issues. Even when the threat to a minister's life is very real, now is the time to preach. Now is the time to endure the fiery darts of the devil, the schemes of man, the fleeting pleasures of sin. We need to set all that aside so that the gospel can be proclaimed boldly, to sound into the chambers of this dark world a song of hope. That's what the world needs. The chaos and the war and the bloodshed. We need hope. We need a new way declared to us. For the hopeless, they need to be offered hope. For the lifeless, they needed to be offered the life of Jesus. They need to be shown and offered the righteousness of Christ, which comes from heaven, promised in the gospel to an unrighteous world. That we simply receive these things by faith, made right, given life and hope in God's sight. We need to stick together, not deserting. And now we need to be training men and those to train other men and so on and pass it on. Now is the time to follow Paul's historic example that he shared in this letter. It may feel hopeless at times. It may feel like an insurmountable task. It may feel like the knives are being sharpened and we can hear the metal. But as the great martyr Hugh Latimer said, the drop of rain maketh a hole in the stone, not by violence, but by oft falling on it. Will we endure? What are the means to help us with foes, with enemies? What are the means to help you endure? And so we turn now to Paul's friends. Now, Paul's loneliness wasn't entirely down to Demas's desertion. Sometimes a gospel minister, a gospel worker can be lonely because their co-workers and colleagues are off doing other good things. And when the church is struggling and the message needs to be shared, that's probably going to happen more often than not. And so these other three men mentioned alongside Demas, well, they're not around Paul, but the circumstances of their absence are quite different, as we'll see. Now, this guy, Crescens, isn't mentioned anywhere else. We don't know anything about him. But we know all from here is he's serving in Galatia. And Titus, who we've just done the series in Titus, haven't we? Titus was church planting on the island of Crete, remember? And that's where he was. But now that seems to be done, and he's gone on to Dalmatia, which corresponds to modern-day Croatia. So that's where he is. And Tychicus, verse 12, he has been sent to Ephesus. Now, this one's important because Ephesus is where Timothy is located. And Paul has said, doesn't he? He says he wants his young charge to come to him. Come to me quickly. Come to me. So leave Ephesus behind. He's the chief elder. He's in charge of the church in Ephesus. So you've got to leave that, Timothy, and you've got to come to me. So he's sending Tychicus to replace him. And again, in the original, the word is he's apostled him. He's apostled him to this task. He's ordained him and commissioned him. So pack your bags, Timothy. He's on his way. You've got no say in the matter. Come to me quickly. The church in Ephesus will be fine. So those three are off doing good gospel work. Demas has walked away, but Luke is with him. His favourite physician and historian is by his side. Paul really needs his friends around him at this particular time. He's got three sources of comfort I want to share with us here. Three friends that he asks for. First, he asks for good company, people to keep him company. Secondly, he asks for his cloak. Winter's coming and there's nothing like the feeling of your old friend, that favourite coat. And finally, he asks for his dear friends, his books and scrolls and parchments. So let's think about these three things that Paul is asking for. Let's see how they are a means and a comfort to him. And it's important that we stress this because with all this talk about suffering for the gospel and compromise ministries and all these things around us and desertion and not choosing comfort and ease in this life, we might think, wow, the Christian life sounds awful. There's no joy, there's no comfort, there's no pleasures, there's no companionship, there's nothing good. But that's far from the case. And these lovely snippets that Paul just drops in here like sweets for us help us to see that. There is a kind of comfort and ease for us. There is a kind of joy. There is a sort of companionship that is promised to us. But it's not what the world says. It's totally different. And these things that are given to us, they don't necessarily bring us liberty. They don't necessarily bring us prosperity or physical relief, but they give us deep spiritual refreshment in the midst of our suffering. These then are true friends, true means of grace, true sources of help for the suffering, lonely Christian. These are the means for us to endure. Paul asks for his scrolls and his parchments. He wants to have them close to him. And it is guesswork, but I think it's an educated guess here to say, I reckon the Hebrew scriptures are probably included in that. Maybe some of the writings of Jesus, the words he said, maybe some of his other letters. It's good to have these sources of encouragement for us, aren't they? The Bible and the scriptures and letters and sermons from others. Now, for me, I love the books that I have because as I read through church history or read through sermons, I feel like I'm hanging around with friends. I know I'm a bit sad and a bit weird like that, but you really feel like these men are there with you. They're long dead, they're long with Jesus, but they're a source of comfort. They're a help to me. They're like mentors for ministry as we mine their wisdom. It's not a sign of weakness that Paul asks for these things to be brought at this stage of his life, as some have supposed. This is perfectly normal. This is human behavior. This is how you and I will endure. These are the means of grace that are given to us, so we will withstand the persecutions so that we won't walk away. We need our Bibles. We need the life of Jesus and his words to be shared with us and spoken to us. These are the words that silence the accuser. These are the words that give us comfort and life. Though all around may fail, though the flames may threaten us, these words will never pass away. Never. We need good books, don't we? We need the comfort that they give to us. Not to scratch our ears, we need to be careful of that, but to water our thirsty souls and to give us an encouragement to endure. John Calvin said, "This passage refutes the madness of the fanatics who despise books and condemn all reading and boast only of their enthusiasmus, their private inspirations by God. But we should note that this passage commends continual reading to all godly men as a thing from which they can profit." I sometimes hear people say that they aren't readers. Not because they struggle to read, I get that. I'm a slow reader myself. Not because they can't find the time to read, I get that. I'm a parent. But we can still find the time. That's another thing though, isn't it? But with some folk, there is just that air about them of Calvin's fanatic. Don't know if you've ever come across this. A sense of superiority. Oh, I just have the Lord. I don't need books. I'm just Holy Spirit taught. As if somehow studying and reading the scriptures is elbowing the Spirit out, when of course this is the method the Spirit chose to communicate the life of God to us. Books, reading, preaching. So verse 13, Paul asks Timothy, he's on his way now to Ephesus, stop off at Carpus's place and get the cloak, get the parchments, something to keep his body warm, something to keep his soul warm. That's what Paul needs. Not a barrister to set him free, but the parchments which preach to him the liberty of the soul and security and life in the age to come. He asks for these little comforts, these little things to come to him. But the thing that Paul desires the most are his contemporaries, his friends for ministry. Is Timothy and Mark, he wants to come with him as well. He wrote in chapter 1 that he longs night and day for his friend Timothy to come. The joy that he'll have when he sees him. You see Paul's heart here? And by the way, longing for the age to come, longing for the presence of Jesus, and longing for an experience of joy in Christian fellowship in the here and now are not incompatible feelings. God himself is a relational God, isn't he? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit have enjoyed each other's company eternally. It's a very godly thing to want to have people around us. In fact, it's not good for man to be alone. No matter how introverted we may be, and some people are, we mustn't ever fall into the trap of thinking, ready for this, that the company of Jesus is all you need. Don't ever fall into the trap of thinking the company of Jesus is all you need. That's quite a thing to say, isn't it? If we do think it's just a private thing, me and Jesus, that's it, then why church? Why heaven with the myriad? Why the Bible? No, we need all of these things. God has planned that his people should dwell together and enjoy fellowship with each other and have each other's company and friendship. That is the best way to experience the life of God, for he himself is a lively community of persons. So to be like God is to have friends around us, people to love and serve and back and forth, to be in fellowship with them. To be without Christian fellowship, to be churchless, is ungodlike and frankly ungodly. Paul doesn't despise these means of grace, his books, his clothing, and his friends. He calls for them in his darkest hour. And if we are going to endure, we need these things around us too. If it's good enough for Paul, the apostle, it's good enough for you and for me. We need to be fed. We need to be reading our Bibles. We need good Christian books. We need fellowship. We need the brotherhood and the sisterhood of the church. I dare say a churchless Christian is more likely to do a Demas. A churchless Christian is more likely to fall prey to those creepy false teachers. And we need to look after our bodies. Paul needs his coat. He doesn't want to get cold. With all that's going on, you could just imagine Paul, kind of this reckless asceticism. Oh, the cold will do me good. Yeah? Nothing will fortify me like a bit of pneumonia and exposure. No, rug up warm if the option is there. Look after yourself, folks. It's important that we do this because we do not know when we are going to be called upon. We need to be ready to testify and to witness. And if we've not looked after ourselves, if we've not fed ourselves, if we've not got the company of brothers and sisters around us, we are more likely to fail. We need to be ready to preach the word out of season. It's easy to live the Christian life and to preach the word in season, but what about out of season? Paul gives that solemn charge in this letter to preach the gospel in season and out of season. And the genius of this final section is that and we could easily miss this, he's giving his version, his example of, look, I preach the gospel out of season, and here's the example. This is my out of season preaching, Timothy. I want to give you an example of what that looks like in my life. Here I am in prison. Here I am facing trials, literally like courtroom stuff. Follow my example. Look what happened to Paul. It's a kangaroo court. Everyone's deserted him. It's all gone wrong. But verse 17. The Lord stood by me and strengthened me. There it is. I am with you. I am with you always, even to the end. The Lord was his advocate. Paul hadn't lost faith. He was still sharp. His armor was on, his sword was drawn, and the Lord emboldened him so that through Paul's trial there in the court, the Roman court, he could actually fully proclaim the gospel so that the Gentiles there might hear it. I love this. I love kind of the beautiful irony of this for the Romans. I love imagining what happened that day, okay? So imagine it with me, right? This great big room, not too dissimilar from this one, columns all down the side. Imagine that kind of Roman villa style thing. The judge sits there on the big chair on the platform, and that platform is called the tribunal. And there's a big marble chair, and enthroned is the highest legal authority of Rome, perhaps even Nero himself if he was there. And he's flanked by these assessors, these advisors, these procurators, these barristers, these men of standing like Alexander, the coppersmith. Beady-eyed, I bet he was feeling very pleased with himself. Ha ha! No more preaching for you, Paul. The rest of the room and the galleries are wedged full of people because the Romans love to do these things publicly. They built these huge basilicas to host the trials because they wanted as many of the general public as possible to see and behold the rule and power of Nero. You cannot thwart the will of the emperor. And so they ram the halls full. And so the crowd's there, fallen silent, and this pathetic little man, he's dragged in, little Paul there with his eye complaint. He's a poor public speaker, by the way. The Corinthians noted that. He was a terrible orator. His mangled body is dragged in. The charge is read out. This man does not worship Nero, and he corrupts our people by preaching the religio illicita. He defies our ruling that to speak of Jesus of Nazareth and to preach and to promote this, he must be sentenced to death. All men of Rome, see this day our power and our ruling and what happens to you if you defy us. And you can hear the sniggers all around and the scoffing and the murmurings, not least from the platform. Pathetic little man, all on his own, poor Paul. The full force of a world superpower facing him. Not a single friend by his side. They couldn't see his heavenly friend, of course, his advocate who gave him strength. And so with the thought of those words, I am with you, always, filling Paul's heart. The moment the tribune then asks him to plead his cause, you could see this wide smile. Really? Okay, plead my cause. He gestures to speak. Your Honour, you wish for me to plead my cause? Let me just check that, sir. Yes, maggot, get on with it. Come on. The empire will not be undermined. As you wish, sir. Your Honour, I am charged with this fact that I preach a message of chaos and of anti-rule, but that's not the case, sir. I preach a message of life and of hope and of the righteous rule of King Jesus, Jesus who came and lived and Jesus who died for you, sir, that you may have life, and so on and so on. And he's preaching the word at the very trial that he's facing for preaching the word. It's brilliant, isn't it? It's awesome. I love it. For Paul, the way to stop Nero isn't to pick up a sword or to form a campaign group to lobby him. It's to preach the gospel and save him. And I dare say, for us, the way to change the heart of a jihadi is just the same. Confess your faith. We need to outlive them. We need to outlove them. We need to outpreach them. We need to outpray them. And we will endure with our friends around us, books, some warm clothing, and our heavenly friend at our side, never leaving us. He's never forsaking us. He will never walk away like Demas. We have all that we need to stand, to withstand, to persevere. Paul ran his race this way. His eyes were fixed on his Lord. No deviation, no rabbit holes, no shortcuts, no path of least resistance. He had all the comfort he needed in Jesus, in the Bible, in church fellowship, and in his books, his favourite cloak. And friends, if you and I are going to endure to the end in a climate which is surely changing to bring in more and more potential for persecution for us, if we're going to run our race, we need these means around us too. Perhaps you and I will be sharp enough, like Paul, to actually preach and confess the faith in a situation where we're being told off for doing just that. Perhaps we will. So we thought about his foes, we thought about his friends. Finally, very quickly, Paul's farewell. Paul's farewell. I wanted to focus on this because it reveals something of his heart, of Paul the man, because he's written, not in just this letter, but right through the New Testament, all these letters he's written half the New Testament. He's written forcefully, he's not minced his words, he's given doctrine, he's given instruction, he's given advice, he's rebuked. But his last words, his last stroke of the pen, is reserved for people. I love this. We see Pastor Paul and his heart. He doesn't forget to send greetings to this one, to that one. Oh, don't forget our friend who's fallen ill in Miletus. Remember Eubulus and Pudens and Linus and that dear sister Claudia? They all say hello. We can see right here, just in that little simple fact that he remembers these people, that he greets them, that the apostle practiced what he preached. He was good with people. He kept the main thing, and he endured to the end. He outlived his opponents. His quality of life was incredible. He outloved them. He shared all the good things of grace and of the gospel with them. He outpreached them. Even when the heat was on, he preached and preached and preached. His heart was on fire for Jesus. And he prayed. He outprayed them. He prays non-stop for these here and those in Ephesus and the Colossians and so on. How? How could Paul do this? Well, as Dr. Livingston said, as he took hold of that incredible promise of Jesus, "Lo, I am with you. I am with you always, even to the very, very end." Amen.